Testing. Hello, and welcome again to MakingComics.com. This is the podcast. You can subscribe to it on iTunes, which is probably the best way. And today we got a very cool guest, and Daniel Lieske will be joining us towards the end of the podcast. We got our times all mixed up and didn't account for like daylight savings time and all that stuff. So, and we forced him to wake up at like 5 or 6 in the morning. Anyway, so what's cool about this is a recording with Jake Parker, who you might know from Missile Mouse and the Flight Anthology. And we recorded this episode probably about a month ago, and I was too lazy to edit it and put it online. But since then, Jake has released a Kickstarter campaign, and within the first 3 days, it's raised something like $35,000, and it's doing extremely well. And I highly recommend going and checking it out, if anything, for how to make an awesome Kickstarter campaign, but also just because it's a really good looking book. It's a compilation of all his short stories, and it's a great price, $25 for a signed hardcover copy. So I'll give you the linkage towards the end of the show so you can check it out after you listen.
All right. So I'm Jake Parker. I am a comics artist / illustrator / concept artist / father, husband. What else have I done? Basically, I've worked on feature films, I've worked on comic books, and I've worked on picture books and everything in between. I've done 2 graphic novels called Missile Mouse through Scholastic's Imprint Graphics. And so if you follow the Bone Books or Amulet or things like that, those are the same publisher that does my Missile Mouse books. And then I've been a contributing member to the Flight Anthologies for several years. Have a few stories in there. And I worked at Blue Sky Studios for several years on Horton Hears a Who, Ice Age 3, Rio, and some other not released films. And what else? Oh, I just recently did a picture book with Michael Chabon called The Astonishing Secret of Awesome Man. It came out last September, and I did the illustrations. He wrote the words, and it's a story about a superhero and it's an astonishing secret. So we'll leave it at that. and I guess that's me in a nutshell.
What's your website?
Right. So my website is mrjakeparker.com. You can see my artwork. There's a link to my blog. Agent 44 is the name of my blog. And then my Twitter is at Mr. Jake Parker. So you can follow me on Twitter, where I spend a lot of time as well.
Very good.
So I guess the reason I'm out in Utah is I left Blue Sky to teach for a year at Brigham Young University to teach concept art, character design, and digital painting. So that's sort of what's brought me out here, and I've just been working on a bunch of other stuff since. So
yeah, so you kind of have like a creative job that you do during the day, that right now, and then you're working on new graphic novels and stuff like that.
Yep,
am I right?
Exactly. And
awesome.
I guess so actually right now I'm roughing out a comic as we speak, so
very cool. Well, this show seems to be the show that people actually get work done while we're having conversations, so it's pretty good. Except for me. Yeah, well, I don't get any work done.
Yeah.
What are the things that you're learning right now as you are trudging forward, making your own books and stuff?
Things I'm learning now is how to keep it simple, I think. That's important.
Are you talking about story or art?
Story, and I've noticed my artwork has gotten clearer, I think. And I saw that between book 1 of Missile Mouse and book 2, how I simplified things, and part of it was just shortcuts because it's hard work making a book, and part of that was just for clarity's sake. But I think story-wise too, like I usually when I do a story, I wouldn't say I'm like the strongest storyteller. Like that's the thing that I struggle with the most. So usually I find a story that I love, and I try to dissect that and see what made that story work. And then I see, well, how can I apply that to my book? And in that process, I've been drawn to stories that are really simple, but from that you get a lot of satisfaction and maybe some complexity as far as the characters and how they interact out of it. And one that comes to my mind is True Grit. That one, I came into that really with story on my mind, and I wanted to just kind of analyze that thing, and basically it's just about a girl who wants justice, and that's all. She just wants Tom Chaney, and she wants him dead. And from that, you get this beautiful story about, a girl growing up to a sense. I mean, she starts out pretty grown up, but she really does mature, and she kind of figures out the world, the seriousness of the world and the stakes of real life. And she meets these characters, and she finds that, nothing's really cut and dry, black and white. She comes into it thinking, oh, it's easy. I'll get a bounty hunter, and, I'll get justice. Or I guess he's not a bounty hunter. He's that's beside the point. And then she comes to find out, well, it's not black and white. And this guy wants the character he wants, justice for what he's done over here. And this guy's like, well, I'll do it for a price. And so from there, you get all this kind of neat complexity, but it starts out with a very simple, drive for that character. And that's what's kind of getting me right now. That's what I'm learning, is how to figure that stuff out.
That's interesting you say that you don't feel like the story is your strength, because it seems like a lot of the creator, artist, writer type people, kind of say the same thing. Like, I mean, I know that's what I always say. I always tell people, like, story is, I've never been educated in it.
Yeah.
And, it's all just been just observing, like, every story I can get my hands on, and just pulling it apart and trying to, just find what makes a story interesting to me. And, but yet at the same time, since we are the artist and storyteller, it seems like we can get away with a lot of things just because we're telling a story visually through, through how creative we can put our art together on the page too. So there's a lot of forgiveness in our learning curves.
Exactly.
I guess.
Yeah, and I think too, there's a certain amount of just being a human. There's a certain amount of storytelling ability that we're born with. That's human nature, is to tell a story. You come home from work and your wife's like, "Oh, how's your day?" And you just go off into a story, and it's perfectly natural. So there's that. But I think the thing that I struggle with is maybe I overcomplicate things. So it's like, whereas, if I sit down and I'm not thinking about it, I can tell a fine story. But if I, well, what's my character's drive, and what is the, the turning point for this character in Act 2, and what is this point of no return, and this push towards the end type, and I try to think about those things. That's when it gets really complicated. And I think part of me is just letting the natural side come out. And I think when I get into tight spots and it's not working, that's when you go back to theory and you go back to to the books that you read and those types of things.
It sounds like it kind of reminds me of the Stephen King approach in his book on writing, where he's just like, I just know my characters and I just let them do what they would do, and I don't even know where the story's going to go. And it seems like he's completely, anti-structure almost. It's very interesting, because there's definitely like structure and then non-structure type storytellers, and there's good and bad in both category.
Yeah. So
it really does just depend on, what works for you. And I feel like I'm kind of the same way, where I once I figure my characters out, I like to just let them kind of run where I think they would run and do what I think they're going to do. And I always compare what I've put together with like structures like the hero's journey and stuff. And I'm always shocked to see that it kind of naturally fits. It's not really something that I consciously did, but it just kind of naturally fits. And yes, there are times when, I'm stuck and it doesn't seem like it's a big enough, point that I'm making, and I can say, oh, well, that's because this seems to be like the end of Act 2 or whatever. I don't know. So that's
I like
interesting to hear.
I like your point though about you just know your characters so well and you let it just happen. That's always been sort of intimidating to me because like for Missile Mouse, like I created him originally when I was 14. And I'd just been drawing him all the years and always...
Which I love that you had a post where it showed all the different versions of him over the years.
Yeah.
It's so great to just see how it just slowly built.
Yeah.
And great.
And it was like I knew how I wanted him to look visually, and because I'm artist first, like I always was just like, oh, he's this mouse and he goes in and he takes care of business and he shoots things up, right? But it wasn't until I sat down and started writing like actual stories for him where I'm like, okay, well, is he compassionate or does he not care? Or, does he just want to get the job done, or is he more, calculating? And I realized I didn't know this character like I thought I was supposed to. And it wasn't until halfway through the first book where I really started to know who he was. And the second book came about really easy. Like, that's when I started to feel like, oh, he is writing himself. Like, he is another person in my brain that's doing his own thing, and I'm just recording it. Yeah.
Just like a best friend or something that really well, and you know what he would do in a situation.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's how I've naturally been that way, because I've written a lot of stories where, man, I don't have a clue what these characters are like.
Yeah.
And because of that, they're all the same voice. Like I have a whole cast of characters, and it's all just my voice, but dumbed down, which is pretty hard to get dumber. No. But it's just all me, but just like my high school personality. Like I have this old comic called Phobos, and every character is just me in high school. And it's a girl, it's a guy, it's just, it doesn't matter who it is, the mad scientist.
That's funny. So wait, you drew it in high school, right?
I drew it in high school, yeah. And it's one of these stories that it's probably your Missile Mouse. It's like I keep recreating it, and every now and then I think about it, and just like even like 3 months ago, I wrote the whole script from start to finish again, thinking I'm gonna start this thing over, because these characters I really love, and as the time has gone on, I have developed personalities for them, but I'm realizing how two-dimensional they were back in the day.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to put that personality into them, I need to scrap what I did back then. So it means a complete rewrite,
Yeah.
But after, and I just still don't. There's still a lot of problems with the characters that I'm still working out, because these old wrong ideas that I had in my head are still kind of ingrained in the characters, and so it's kind of stripping away what they were to allow what they should be to come in. So, and as far as my current book, like I feel like I've like my fear is exactly what you're saying. Like I've overcomplicated it, and the story, just everything. It's just like I've thought about it way too much, and deconstructed it way too many times. But it, people seem to like it, so I gotta rely on that a little bit.
Right. Well, that's you do have to kind of rely on feedback from others too. But I know. The thing that I just worry is that I overcomplicate things too much, and like that's what I've been talking a lot about with Scotty too. It's like, we get in, we start writing these stories, and then pretty soon it's like, oh, you need to give this character sort of this crisis at this point, and then you need to, and it's like pretty soon you've got this way, you're like worrying about the wrong stuff, because you're kind of tied into what everyone tells you what you should be doing for story, instead of just letting it flow naturally. And it's just me trying to fight against that, I guess.
Yeah.
And I remember,
wow, I'm so on the same page as that, because I hear all these rules and I'm like, okay, that makes sense, and it does fit, but I hate, starting with that.
Yeah.
Because like you say, it's like it hammers your story into something prematurely, I think, instead of letting it unfold the way you want it to, and then helping it when it needs help.
And I remember hearing a podcast or something with Andrew Stanton, like after Wall-E came out.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about story, and he's like, when we were writing Toy Story, and when Pixar was first starting, like we went to Robert McKee's story thing like 5 times, and we read that book, and we've read all the screenwriting books, and he's like at some point you just have to put everything up on the shelf, put it all away, and sit down and just start writing, and write just what comes out. And he's like, you do that, and that's where your story happens, and you're not worried about, construction and theory and all that stuff. It happens naturally, because all that's, in the back of your head, and you're sitting there writing really the emotional part, like what's driving it. He said, and then if you hit that brick wall, you can pull that book off the shelf and be like, okay, what's the problem here with my, with my villain? Like maybe they're not strong enough, or I'm not getting enough. Then you can go back and see like, oh, well, your villain needs to have the same goal as your protagonist, and then you can iron those things out, but not until you've written it out and sort of put those things away.
Wow, I love that. That's great. I really I like hearing that, because it's like, I feel like I've heard the opposite too many times from people up, who, I don't know whether they're selling courses on how to write or what.
Yeah.
Just like structure. Start with structure. You need to do this.
Yeah.
So,
and I think,
but yeah, that's a breath of fresh air.
I think too, like, because I've been teaching a comics class on the side here in Utah, and and talking to these students, and tonight we were just talking about how to get your stuff published. It was sort of like this open, just ask me whatever type of thing, right? And one of the students was all worried about not being able to draw well enough, and having to get in, 10,000 hours and those types of things, right? And I told her, I was like, okay, yeah, you need to be able to draw at a certain level. That's good. But you also need to, you can't be drawing all the time, and you can't be writing all the time. You also need to go out and experience life, and because I think all the great stories that we love are based off of something that happened in life to the person telling the story, and it's part of that, like letting it come naturally. Like if you go and you spend a weekend with like your grandparents, like that'll probably do more for you as far as coming up with good characters than reading any book on character development.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So I just told her, I'm like, okay, yeah, you draw a bunch, draw as much as you can, but don't forget to live life, because that's where, that's what's really going to help you. I think too, like, it reminded me too, I don't know if you saw like the making of Spirited Away, but there's this one, I'll never forget it. There's this one thing where Miyazaki is talking with his animators, right? And he's explaining the scene where they have to stick that pill, that medicine, in the dragon's mouth. And he says, okay, so how they're like, well, how would you do this, Miyazaki? He's like, well, you'd kind of hold his head there and lift up the gums. You know how, like, when you're giving a dog a treat, or you have to give a dog medicine, and you flap the gums up, and all of them are looking at him like, it's kind of spaced.
Like, okay. I've never given a dog medicine.
And he's like, you guys have played with a dog before, or you've done that? And they're like, no, we haven't. And he's all, what do you guys do all the time? Like, we animate. And he's like, no, you guys got to go out and experience life. And if it's good enough for Miyazaki, yeah. I guess it's good enough for me. So
Miyazaki is, it's probably one of the most influential storytellers for me, and probably so many people listening to this.
It was pretty bad when Mobius died, right? But Miyazaki dies, it's going to be, I don't even want to think about that. That's why, we need to all do like Miyazaki fan art right now and tell him how much we appreciate him.
Yeah, I'm down with that. I can do some fan art.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Please make Rosso too before you die, Miyazaki.
Yeah.
Please.
I can see a lot of part 2s that I would like him to make. One of the emails I got was kind of on the same subject of just world building.
Yeah, world building. That's like you have different kinds of creators, right? And I put them in 2 camps. So you have, maybe there's 3 camps, but the 2 ones that I'm thinking about right now is you have the world builders and you have the character builders. And both of them create characters and both of them create worlds, but one of them sort of services the other, and out of that comes the other. So I look at a world builder as somebody like J.K. Rowling or George Lucas, also James Cameron. And these are the big name world builders, right? But then, of course, it's also like you've got J.R.R. Tolkien, and what these guys do is they think of these worlds like start to finish. So it's not, the world just isn't where the story's taking place, for that 2-day period that your story happens, or that week-long period that your story happens. Like, this world has existed for centuries before and centuries after. And these people like to think about the geopolitical situation. They like to think about, what corporations play key roles, what nations play key roles. They like to think about all these big things, but then they also, go smaller and smaller from that. So like, down to like spaceships and guns, and, if it's a Star Wars thing. So this Millennium Falcon has a past. Like it was this old beat up junker that used to be the fastest starship. And so basically a world builder is thinking of all of these details. Like, it's not just good enough to have the spaceship, but they're thinking, okay, here's the spaceship, and it's, did the Kessel Run in 5 parsecs or whatever, and it's been handed down, and finally Han Solo got it, and he's been repairing it and trying to get it back to its former glory or whatever. And so what that does is it all of a sudden gives, it's not just a spaceship, but it's almost a character in and of itself. And so you also have J.K. Rowling, so she'll say, here's Hogwarts and here's the history of Hogwarts, but then she'll go on and she'll briefly mention a school in Japan or a school in America that teaches, wizardry, right? And she's figured that out. Like she hasn't just mentioned it, but she's got that figured out. Okay, here's what this school is, and this is its name, and it probably has this many students, and it's located at this area, and the reason for that, figuring all that out, is you just want to be able to refer to it, and all of a sudden just that little reference to that thing expands that world even more. So it's like when Obi-Wan's talking to Luke, and he's like, I fought beside your father in the Clone Wars, and he was an expert pilot. And he goes on. He doesn't mention the Clone Wars again, but Lucas knew what, supposedly he knew what the Clone Wars were, and he knew it was this big, vast, battle for the galaxy and all that stuff. But he just briefly mentioned it, and all of a sudden your brain's like, Clone Wars? I wonder what that's all about. And then all of a sudden it makes that world so much bigger. So I think for you listening to this, and you want to know, whoever's out there that wants to know how to build your world, you got to start with asking yourself some questions. And the questions that I asked myself for Missile Mouse was, okay, what are the inhabitants of this universe? What do they do for fun? What do they do for food? What do they do for work? What do they do for shelter? Just answer those questions. How big is this universe that they inhabit? How many races make up this universe? Is it one, or is it multiple? Is it thousands, or is it 100? What are the major? Is it run by one government that kind of oversees everything, or does each planet have their own government? What kind of corporations play a major role? What kind of level of technology can they beam themselves, or do they have to take a rocket ship to get from planet to planet? What kind of economy do they have? Do they use money, or do they barter, or do they transfer money through SpacePal or something like that? What do they do for, what kind of historical events has played a role in their universe? So with Missile Mouse, I knew there was this, the first book is all about him trying to find this ancient weapon before the bad guys get it. And supposedly these weapons are all destroyed, none are left, but he finds a map that takes them to, that says, oh, there's one of these weapons left, right? And so he has to race to get to that weapon before the bad guys do. Well, where did this weapon come from? So, 1,000 years ago, there was this major war for the universe, or for the galaxy, and they made these crazy weapons that make black holes and suck in solar systems. And after that war was over, they destroyed all those weapons so that no one would ever have that, they wouldn't worry about that danger again. And that was that. But one of them, was saved. And so everyone's racing to get this, right? And so that's one of those things where it's I've got that whole back history, 1,000 years, but I don't have to explain it all. I can just refer, back during the Great War, they had these weapons, and all of a sudden it kind of, expands that universe by just mentioning those things. But I think it's dangerous to just throw something out there with not knowing what you're saying, because it might come back to bite you. People might say, oh, well, this is inconsistent where he mentions this here. So it's good to know that back history. But yeah, so that's the kind of thing. It's just be, be the reporter in your universe, find out what causes what and what leads to what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it seems like, a lot of people, when they think of world building, they think of and I mean, maybe you're halfway saying this, you have to like have every bit of the history books completely written, and everything's, every spaceship, even if you don't show it figured out to the T. But it doesn't seem like that's what you're saying. It's like you know for yourself what it is, and you can just refer to it. Just because you know it's there when you're writing about your story, it will probably be referred to, just like in Star Wars, back in the Clone Wars, and then it can be expanded on later. And am I right in saying that? It's more like...
Yeah, you don't have to put everything in your story, but it's good to know that stuff, just to have it like in your back pocket, because it's like it sweetens the pot a little bit, where two characters can be talking and they can have this little backstory that they know about and they refer to, but and it makes
the audience their mind starts wondering and building this world as they're reading it, when you only wrote one sentence about it,
right?
Type thing.
And I think too that goes back to me saying I'm trying to learn how to simplify things too, because I want to go in and explain it all. Like I want to say, oh, the Great War, it was started this, and the Archduke was destroyed, was assassinated, and blah blah blah, right? But it's pulling back, and it's just saying, just referring to the ever littlest detail that hints to more, and that's what.
Or even if it's just like destruction left over from the war, or right, for me, it's like it's interesting hearing you say this, because the world I created in Remind is really isolated. It's really small, I feel, because it's this little tiny town that's a little tourist town, and then there's the little tiny kingdom underneath it, and it goes a little bit in other directions too as the story goes, but it really stays kind of just focused on that. But I feel like people accept it as its own giant own universe, just because I did things like made the lighthouse, kind of bizarre, and just to kind of explain why I made this lighthouse with the lights that kind of go up into the air and stuff, is because I wanted to say, well, maybe there's spaceships in this world. I don't want to put them in there, but maybe it's this kind of advanced enough to where a ship could, an airship could float by, and I don't know,
but I think too, like world building, I'm talking about Missile Mouse and I'm talking about the galaxy, right? But world building also means, like, even if it just takes place on an island, like figure that island out, think about that island, where it was 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, and that will enrich that location and your world, the world that you're building, even more.
Yeah, that reminds me. I mean, it's kind of a different subject, but like with characters, all the main characters in my world, I like to figure out. One rule of thumb I like to do is figure out where they came from, because that influences who they are now, where they're going right now, and where they're going to. That gives me a sense of what their actions need to be to make it to this point. But just like you're saying, like I never thought of that, of where did your little island or your world, like what was the history of that, like 100 years, 1,000 years. I mean, I guess I have thought of it, obviously I've thought about some of this stuff, but yeah, I guess that's one of the things I never really hammered home, it's, I don't know, it's interesting. It's good stuff.
Yeah. And I think too, like going back to like the two kinds, like there's the character builders, there's the world builders too. Like, so the character builders think about all that stuff too, on the character level. And I think really you need both to make a great story. Like J.K. Rowling definitely figured out her characters, but I think some creators kowtow to one more than the other. Like definitely Lucas in the prequels, he was definitely thinking of geopolitical situations more than he was thinking about interpersonal relationships. Except I really liked Darth Sidious. He was the best character in that show. It was fun to watch him.
I watched the new Star Wars, and I actually don't really remember much of them because I liked it for what it was, but yeah. I don't even know who Darth Sidious is.
Oh, he's the Emperor. He's the Emperor.
Okay. See, that shows my how.
I'm going to come clean on George Lucas right now, since this is public, and I'm just going to say this right now. Okay, prequels were what they were, and they're not like these masterpieces, right? And yeah, they're kind of bad. But George Lucas has made such a big deposit in his creative bank account, like that bank account for me with the original Star Wars and with Indiana Jones, that that he can take out some he could take out some of that and make a prequel and make a bad Indiana Jones film, and his balance is still like okay in my book.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Oh yeah,
I'm gonna give him that.
I'm 100% with you there. Yeah, I'm not bagging on the new Star Wars either. I watched them and I enjoyed them. I think I mean it was entertaining. So I'm definitely not one of the real critical Star Wars fans. But I mean, obviously I love the first ones the most. And like you say, Indiana Jones is. I mean, yeah, it's life changing stuff that. I think he influenced everybody.
Right, I owe him so much just for him, convincing Spielberg to do Indiana Jones and them doing that together. And for Star Wars, okay, you can go make you can make 4 bad movies or whatever, and you're still okay in my book.
Yeah.
So there, I said it. That's my George Lucas thing. And if I were to met him, I'd just say thank you. Right?
Yeah. So world building, character building, and how they both kind of influence each other, and the best ones are usually when you do both equally, and they build off of each other. Yeah. Good stuff.
I think so.
I agree. Yeah, I was digging through my emails because I get a couple emails about, when people hear a show and then they ask me a question and they're like, or they talk about like this crazy thing they're going through.
Uh-huh.
And one of them was, it was so weird because I totally related to it, but it was like so extreme, where the guy was saying like, I've been self-publishing comics for like 30 years or something like that. And he's like, and I haven't sold anything. He's like, I can't sell anything. And I've been doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. And he's like, your last episode just made me realize I need to quit. And it was like, it was a hard thing to read, but at the same time, part of me was sad about that. But another part of me felt the burden kind of lift off of his shoulders, because I know I've gone through that myself with these projects that I started. Like, for instance, my project was an animation at first, and after like 7 years and only getting like 5 minutes done, and redoing it over and over again, I realized, I need to quit, and I need to, but I did it as a graphic novel, but I needed to quit the animation. Yeah. And it was such a relief. The moment, it was such a hard decision to make, and it was so, it was so frustrating, and I would be up at night thinking about it, because I spent 7 years of my life working on this on my free time.
Oh, man.
I would save up on freelance jobs so that I could take a month off of work and work on it.
Yeah,
because I had
wow.
these dreams about what this could be and what this, the potential of it, and if I could just get it done, and I kind of woke up. I mean, after talking to a couple of people, I realized that I could work 20, 30 years on this before I get it done, and I wouldn't even be happy with it then, because the stuff I started at the beginning, I keep changing, and I keep getting better as I do it, so I keep wanting to redo old stuff. And
now, your plan was to animate it all by yourself?
Yeah. I just, I was very, very,
Has anybody ever done that? Like a feature? It was a feature, right?
Yeah. Well, the only person I can think of that, he's in a completely different place than I was, but Richard Williams, who did the Thief and the Cobbler, it's just like his personal animation, and he's an animation master, and you see that stuff, and it blows your mind that the kind of work that went into it. Like, it's so ridiculously animated, so overly animated. And then he worked on it 20, 25 years, and then got us. I don't know the exact details. It's been a long time since I looked into it, but he made a deal with a studio to give him a loan or something to fund the tail end of it, the last half an hour or something, and he didn't get it done in time, and he only had 15 minutes left to work of animation to do, and the studio pulled it out of his hands, chopped it all up, and threw in a bunch of animation that was cheaply done with musicals and stuff like that, and then released it, and it bombed because it was just hack job of stuff. Really good animation mixed that's 20 years old, mixed with new animation that's done cheap just so they can put in a musical number, and just so it can fit in with the Disney style or whatever, whoever was.
Okay.
Anyway,
you're depressing me.
It's a horrible story, and he's an animation master. He's kind of one of the he has the book, in my opinion, on how to animate, what is it called, the animation survival kit, right? Is that what it's called?
Right.
I think if you get that book, you can animate right. That's all you need, and you need to learn. You need to practice a lot too. But anyway, so that's a depressing story, and I would think about stuff like that. Okay, do I want to put 25 years into this and then not be fulfilled by it even then because it's not what I want it to be? And then my idea was, I want to get this done so I can work on my next project, And I'm great, so that's going to be another 25 years, so I'll be dead before I can finish my second one, And it was just, it's kind of once I finally realized and thought about all that, just letting it go was a huge I was so light, and I just had a new spunk in my step. Is that a word? Does that make sense? Spring?
That's,
I don't know what I'm saying. I'm tired. And so I was, I had all this energy to work on a new project all of a sudden, and it was Remind, the graphic novel that I'm working on, and I had no direction, no idea what to do. But anyway, but it was just like starting over, and it was so good. But anyway, so the question is, how do you know when to quit? Because you have to be hard-headed at what you're doing to be successful at it. You have to go against all odds. This is my own personal opinion. You got to go against all odds. You got to risk a lot. You got to do all this, stuff that no one else would want to do to really be successful at what you're pursuing, I think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there has to be I guess it's just a difference in every individual. What is your breaking point? I guess it's what it is.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, to answer the guy's question first, he's I've been doing it 30 years or 25 years and I haven't sold it, so I'm just quitting. My question is, if your purpose to make comics is to make money, then yeah. If you haven't made money after 5 years, maybe it's time to call it quits. But if your purpose is to tell stories, then I don't think 25 years telling stories is wasted. You know?
Yeah. And the other thing he said is he writes prose, and he sells that really well. And so my response was, just focus on what you do well, you know?
Yeah.
If you're selling those, then, I mean, you're still being creative.
Yeah.
You
know? And it's like, well, what if you spent 25 years playing piano and you didn't sell one album?
Yeah.
Like, that's still 25 years mastering, or maybe not mastering, but just getting comfortable with one of the hardest things to do, right? And I put comics in there too. Like, that's one of the hardest things to do.
That totally, yeah. That's a great point, because here's the deal with me and my animation. I can look at this as frustrating, working on this thing over and over. But you know what? I showed a little clip of it to a director friend of mine, and I got, and he knew a producer of a studio who needed an animator, and I got an animation job because of that. And then,
there you go.
And then I started doing a lot of animation, and then I got into DreamWorks because of that animation. So, you know what I'm saying? It's like, so there was a full on, like, I can animate really good now, you know? Like, I animate on big movies now. So, from nothing. I mean, no education in animation. So
the other thing too, it's like, animating is, again, one of the hardest things too. Like you get to be such a good draftsman. Like, animators are the best artists, the ones that do it traditionally, right? The best, like, hand drawing artists. And so to take on a project like that is so huge for just mastering a skill of drawing. Like, you'll get your 10,000 hours in pretty quick if you're trying to, animate stuff.